Well, good evening. How are you doing? It's just gone 9 o'clock here in Portstewart, Northern Ireland. I'm staying at home. I hope you're staying home and staying safe wherever you are. And for the past, 4 weeks since lockdown started here in Northern Ireland, I have been reading a chapter every weekday evening from my first memoir, Paperboy. And it was lovely to hear people were enjoying it. And when I asked last week, when I finished Paperboy, would you like to hear some more? People come back and said, yes, would you please continue with Breadboy? So I'm going to continue while we're in lockdown. I'm going to keep going. So I hope you enjoy Breadboy, Teenage Kicks and Teddy Bread, what Paperboy did next. And so I'm going to start this evening with, I'm going to read the introduction to Breadboy, and then also I'm going to read chapter 1. So thanks for watching. Thanks for joining me. I hope you enjoy it. I'll take a wee break in the middle and say hello to a few people as well. So the introduction. I was a bread boy. This never made it onto my CV. So just for the record, the dates of employment were 1977 to 1979. The place was Belfast. Early every Saturday morning, I delivered freshly baked bread to the consumers of the Upper Shankill. On a good day, Belfast was as familiar and comforting as a warm, buttered soda fard. But on a bad day, Belfast was hard and sour like a dry, stale wheaten bannock. I was a bread boy, aged 14, just starting out like a fresh plain loaf newly dispatched from the ovens of the Ormo bakery, full of hope and innocent optimism. A tiny crumb on the streets of a city, still feeding off ancient rivalries that were well past their sell-by date. Yearning for peace, but living through troubles. And yet, as you will learn from the slices of life in these pages, I was happy with my calling. I was a good bread boy. I delivered. So hopefully that gives you an idea of what it's all about. Say hello to a few people. Hello, Evelyn and Pamela. Good to have you. And Robbie and Jean. Hello, Michael and Nigel and the lovely Leslie. Good to have you all along. Hello from California, says Madeline Peterson. Hi, Madeline. Thanks for joining me. Davey Calder. We've been looking forward to this. Read all the books. They're brilliant. Thanks very much. Very kind of you. Looking forward to this, says Francis McGrath as well. Thanks very much for joining me. So this is chapter 1 of Breadboy. I was all grown up now, so I was, 14 years old and nearly shaven. My career had just taken off as impressively as Thunderbird 3 blasting off from Tracy Island. In spite of the fact that jobs were a rarity in Belfast, I had just secured my second major contract of employment. For a few short years, I had been a mere paper boy. But paper rounds were just for wee kids. Now I was a man. I had left such childish things behind. I had hung up my dirty canvas paper bag for good because it was time for me to move on to bigger and better things. While most boys of my age were still struggling to get a job stacking shelves in the co-op, I had been headhunted to work as executive assistant to Leslie McGregor, the head bread man in the last Ormo mini shop in Belfast. My career trajectory was on a steeper incline than a petrol bomb hurtling over the peace wall. I had been appointed to the highly responsible position of bread boy to the Upper Shankill. I had made it. My predecessor in the position had been 16 years old and had resigned to do A-levels so he could get a good job in the bank and move to Bangor. From the vast pool of potential bread boys in the whole of the Upper Shankill, Leslie had chosen me. He had spotted my retail abilities as if he was a talent scout searching for the latest brilliant football player for Linfield. The only two essential criteria in the job specification for Breadboy were no thieving and no giving cheek to the pensioners. Leslie had either heard it through the grapevine or directly from the Reverend Lowe, the minister of Ballygamartin Presbyterian Church. that I met both of the essential criteria. I was a wee girl who went to grammar school, and everyone knew I had been an exemplary paperboy. My excellent customer service reputation had gone before me, up and down the streets of the Upper Shankill like a flute band in July. Leslie must have learned of my reputation as the only pacifist paperboy in West Belfast. I was only ever an observer of riots, and never a participant. No petrol bomb had ever crossed my palms. While other boys may have wanted to wear dark glasses like the Brigadier in the UDA, I longed to wear a leather jacket like the fawns in Happy Days, except my mummy wouldn't let me. And so I had been handpicked from a throng of young hopefuls, the same way the casting director had chosen the new blonde Charlie's Angel after Farrah Fawcett Majors left to become a big film star. Leslie hadn't asked for a written reference from my previous employer, Al Mac, the newsagent, which was lucky because it might have presented a difficulty. Writing had never been Al Mac's preferred method of communication. But I understood from Titch McCracken, one of my former paperboy colleagues, who overheard the conversation while shoplifting brandy balls at the newsagent, that I had received an excellent verbal recommendation from my previous employer. Aye, that wee lad's a queer lot better than all them other cheeky wee thieving shites, Al Mac had said, without hesitating even for a drag of a cigarette. I understood that Leslie accepted this as a most satisfactory reference from a previous employer. I realised that this glowing commendation from Al Mac would be hard to live up to, but I was very ambitious and determined to continue my climb up the employment ladder. I knew Leslie was a master breadman who took no nonsense, so I committed myself wholeheartedly to learning my new trade and continuing my professional development. I was well aware that I was in an extremely privileged position. Leslie's van was not just any old bread van. It was the very last Ormo mini shop in Belfast. Of course, there had been other Ormo mini shops in the recent past, but most had been burnt, either to block a road to free Ireland or create a barricade to save Ulster. Leslie's Ormo mini shop was the last one of its kind in the whole of Northern Ireland. And so the only one left on the planet. This reminded me of the dodo in my biology book at Belfast Royal Academy. Ormo mini shops were almost extinct. Can you imagine the responsibility of becoming the only bread boy in the whole wide world still serving customers from such an endangered vehicle? My job was completely unique. I was the only one. It was just like being the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, except nobody hated you. Everybody wanted bread, and so everyone needed me. I would be delivering one of the essential services. Only water and electricity and hard lager were more important. No one in Belfast could survive without the sustenance of a sliced white pan loaf and a ready supply of potato bread. Our city was more divided than ever, and yet we were completely united in our love for the humble soda farm. It didn't seem to matter what foot you kicked with when you were toasting Vita bread. We all adored it. I wondered if our shared love of bread provided a common bond which held out some hope for peace in the future. Who would care about a united Ireland or a united kingdom as long as we had a fresh malt loaf on the table? I was a dreamer, so I was. The last Ormo mini shop in Northern Ireland was a wonder to behold. Motorbikes being crashed by Evel Knievel enthralled my wee brother, and my big brother was most impressed with Ford Capris in car chases in the Sweeney. But I alone was in awe of the Ormo mini shop. As the name suggests, it was in fact a miniature mobile shop. A marvel of engineering, it had great bulk and reasonable speed. On a busy day, or if there was a suspected hijacker on the street, it could reach speeds of up to 25 miles per hour. This wondrous vehicle was grander than my father's Ford Escort Respray, and more welcome than a Shankill Black taxi when the buses were off. It was a completely square, giant tin box of tasty goodies on wheels. It was the most mouth-watering moving object to arrive in our street since the Poke van. The mini shop was longer than a milk van and a rag and bone cart joined together, and almost the height of a double-decker bus before burning. The diesel engine made a clattery purr as loud as any bin lorry, and certainly noisier than the lemonade vans. You knew when the Ormo mini shop was approaching your street because it growled up the road, leaving all the pathetic traditional little bread vans from the other bakeries cowering at the red, white and blue curbstones in submission to its greatness. The bread man in those other old-fashioned bread vans had to dismount and walk around to the rear of their vans to access the loaves using a long wooden pole to withdraw drawers full of bread onto the street. They used the same poles to protect their produce from marauding gangs of children. Leslie did not have such problems. He simply had to step out of his spacious driver's cab and into the shop, surrounded by shelves heaving with freshly baked bread. And all of this under cover and protected from the ever-present Belfast rain and the odd stone or brick outside. If a gang of wee hoods approached, Leslie could simply close the door and drive off safely. This was 20th century bread service. On the move, in your own street, and with a roof. Of course, you didn't need to rely on the roar of the engine to let you know the Ormo mini shop was coming. It played a little tune, just like the Pokemon's van, but slightly less melodious. When you pressed the red button in the driver's cab, a cheery tune crackled out from a speaker at the back. Diddly-ding, diddly-ding, diddly-ding. At first I enjoyed the power and novelty of being able to send out diddly dings to the people of the Upper Shankill at 5-minute intervals every Saturday morning. But after a short time, the repetition of the tune began to irritate me as much as Boney M singing Ma Baker every half hour on Radio Luxembourg. I soon noticed that the diddly dings seemed to annoy the more hungover customers on the Saturday mornings after the Friday nights before. So we didn't play it so much around the 12th of July because there were usually a lot of hangovers about then, and the tune sounded nothing like the sash anyway. I noticed that Leslie used his diddly dings sparingly and only outside the homes of customers who still hadn't paid for last week's bread. The only other vehicle to drive up our street with an inside of a capacity similar to the mini shop was a British Army Saracen. In Belfast, guns and bombs were as common as a loaf of bread. The Ormo mini shop was a tank of sorts, except our war was with Mother's Pride, the rifle bakery whose muffins were a major threat. While the tanks had soldiers with guns inside, we had apple turnovers with cream. The mini shop seemed to be bigger on the inside than the outside, just like the TARDIS, my favourite mode of transport of my hero, Doctor Who, with the curly hair and the big long scarf. I sometimes imagined our mini shop was actually a time machine that could take me back in time to see dinosaurs roaming the Black Mountain when it was a big volcano, or forward in time to the year 2000 to see Belfast with no paramilitaries roaming the streets. The Ormo mini shop was so spacious that 4 or 5 people could walk around inside at the same time, as long as they hadn't eaten too many of our gravy rings and Florence cakes. The mini shop had shelves of bread and pastries and soft drinks and crisps and sweets on all 4 walls. There were mouth-watering delights from floor to ceiling, apart from at the entrance to the driver's cab and a small window at the back. New customers would always marvel at the fact that this amazing vehicle even had a wee window at the back. This window was important not just for providing natural light to the shop, but also for looking back to check if any customers were running after you because you gave them the wrong change or sold them a blue mouldy barnbrack. It was also useful when I had to play lookout for hijackers hiding up the entries. The fizzy drinks could occasionally be problematic because they often exploded on opening due to all the movement going over potholes where buses had burnt. But most of the other merchandise was warm, fresh, inviting, and relatively inert. Apart from its other many attractions, the most tantalising and memorable feature of the Ormo mini shop was the smell. Unlike me, after my only bottle of brute aftershave had run out, it never smelt bad on a Saturday morning. You see, bath day wasn't until Sundays. The interior of the mini shop was filled with the mouth-watering aroma of freshly baked bread. I loved this smell. It was addictive. Every time I entered the van at 6:30 each Saturday morning, the seductive scent wafting from still warm loaves fresh from the oven made me long for noon, when my labours would be finished for another week. Then I could hurry home with free, fresh soda and potato bread that my father would add to a magnificent Ulster fry, which he cooked while listening to Big T playing Billy Joe Spears on downtown radio. Leslie liked me, so he did. He said I was a good, honest boy because I went to church after getting saved at the Good News Club on my holidays at the Caravan in Malai. This was of vital importance to Leslie. It meant you wouldn't steal money from the till or nick a wagon wheel from the confectionery shelf, even though you really wanted to. Anyway, the big bread bosses at Ormo HQ on the Ormo Road checked Leslie's taking and stock every week, so it was very important that every penny and every single crumb was accounted for. So, I want to say hello to a few people. Who else has joined us? Hi, Evelyn Brown. Yes, thank you. It's good to be back. Hello, Patricia Higgins-McMillan from Brampton, Ontario in Canada. Lovely to have you joining me from across the Atlantic. Madeleine Peterson, born at the markets. Good to have you, Madeleine. Jean Jeffrey. I first heard you reading books at St Thomas Church in Belfast a couple of years ago, and you loved it. Well, I'm glad you could join me for this again. I remember that night. That was a lovely evening. Hi, Glenn Bradley, wee lad. Hope you're doing all right. From the Woodvale. Bernadette Saunders. I'm glad you're looking forward to it. Hi, Aris Matthews in France, and Alan McCready. Oh, Alan McCready, who's the son of the real bread man himself, the legend that is Wesley McCready. And hello, Amanda, another Ballygomartin person, and hello, Andrea Trainer as well. So I'm going to continue with the story. I'm just thinking, Amanda, I'm sure I delivered bread to your house on a Saturday morning. Anyway, this is a little bit more about Leslie McGregor, Alan. Leslie was universally regarded as the most trustworthy and honest person in the whole of the Upper Shankill. He took a Sunday school class, taught the Bible to the boys' brigade on a Sunday morning, even when some of the boys were still hungover from a bottle of Mondays up in Entry the night before, and he looked after all the money in the church. He was like Mother Teresa, only bigger and much, much more Protestant. Leslie was a big good living man, which meant that he didn't drink or smoke or say feck a lot like most men. I never saw him drink so much as a shandy, and I never once heard him call Mr. Black from number 13 the rudest of all customers, a carnapsus-oiled bastard, even though this was clearly the most apt description. Leslie was very holy, but I realised that he must have had sex a few times because he had young children. I suppose he had to do something to pass the time when he wasn't serving bread or at church or at meetings in the Orange Hall. Leslie must have been 30 or something, but he looked like he was much older. He always wore old-fashioned slacks with braces and a shirt and tie under his white coat, just like my chemistry teacher, except Leslie's white coat was bakery regulation rather than scientific attire. Leslie was tall, but he was quite overweight from snacking on the pastry temptations that were always surrounding him. He had thin brown hair, combed to the side with brill cream, and very clear white skin and rosy cheeks like a free Presbyterian. Leslie was a grand, worshipful something or other in the Orange Order, but he was more of an old-school Bible and bowler hat orange man than the new petrol bomb and paramilitary kind. "Your man's an awful good big crater," explained my mother. "Sure, he's in the black as well as the orange." I wasn't quite sure what this meant because I was unschooled in the details of the loyal orders, but my mother was clearly very impressed. Leslie wanted more wee good living boys in the Orange Order instead of underage drinkers, and so he regularly encouraged me to join the Junior Orange Lodge. In spite of his power as my employer and his persuasiveness, I declined these entreaties because I liked the few Catholics I knew, and anyway, my atheist father had pronounced, "No son of mine is joining no Orange Order." My father had decided when the Troubles started that the sash his father wore should remain as a relic in the roof space. In Cleanliness and Purity, Leslie was the complete opposite of my first employer, Owl Mac, but he shared Owl Mac's difficulties in the dental department. He had very few teeth for a man of his age, and most of those that remained seemed to be at risk. Even though he didn't smoke, his vulnerable incisors were stained a malt loaf colour. It must have been all the wee cups of tea and sugary tray bakes pressed upon him by the ladies at the church meetings. While it was true that Leslie could not be tempted with strong liquor, he was a sucker for a caramel square. On Saturday mornings, I feared that several strong bites into a stale fruit scone would precede the demise of his last few teeth, but they seemed to soldier on, undaunted, just like Leslie's views on matters of politics and religion. My bread mentor utilised his limited tooth supply very well, though giving a pleasant smile to most of the customers. Although Leslie was almost completely without sin, he did have one serious weakness. He loved a good gossip, almost as much as Big Aggie in our street. Unfortunately, I suffered greatly as a result of this weakness. A bread run that should have taken 3 hours sometimes took 6, because Leslie spent far too long with every customer talking about what was happening on the road, who was bad with their nerves, who had taken a stroke, who had run off with her fancy man, and why we're being sold down the Dublin Road again and again and again. He spread the latest news throughout the upper Shankill faster than David Dunseith on UTV reports. He started every outpouring of gossip with the same words, "Come here till I tell you." Some customers who were nosy or lonely or both enjoyed every story and would hang on Leslie's every word while clutching their pastries. I noticed others would wince at the sound of "Come here till I tell you" as an unwelcome story unfolded in the claustrophobic confines of the mini shop. The bored customer would slowly edge backwards down the steps with their loaves in their arms, attempting to escape a 10-minute monologue about a certain customer who thinks she has something but never pays her bread bills. Sometimes I was fascinated by the insights Leslie had into what was going on in the Troubles. He was something of an authority on the security policies of the RUC and the British Army, and he gave the impression that he played an important advisory role for MI5. But on other occasions, I was bored rigid when he repeated for the millionth time the same story about Mrs. Piper's affair with a man from a gospel hall up the Newton Arch Road and her that good living and all. I wanted to be finished my labours, not gossiping about the neighbours. My mind often wandered towards more exciting preoccupations like music and movies and outer space and Judy Carlton. Judy Carlton was in my chemistry class. She was lovely, so she was. She had gorgeous blue eyes like Linda Carter, and I wanted her to be my own personal Wonder Woman. I wanted to finish work and get home to practice my cracked Spanish guitar so that I could play like your man and queen with the curly hair. I wanted to listen to ABBA's Arrival album on the stereogram in the sitting room and stare at Agnetha in a white jumpsuit beside a helicopter on the cover. Following my appointment to the post of Breadboy, the first major challenge was to waken up in time to do the job. When Leslie informed me that he would pick me up at our house at 6:30 a.m. on my first Saturday, I nodded knowingly, but inside I was thinking, how am I going to get up at 6 o'clock every Saturday morning? This was extremely early for any morning of the week, never mind a Saturday when everyone else was having a good lie-in. At least my paperboy shifts had been during waking hours, even if I had often delivered my 48 Belfast telegraphs in the early evening darkness. I wondered if I would ever get a job you did in the light. Fortunately, There had been enormous strides forward in the technology of the humble alarm clock. I was able to buy a newfangled digital radio alarm clock from the Great Universal Club book for just 20 weeks at 79p. Digital meant it wasn't old fashioned and round with hands. It was made of impressive white plastic, and you couldn't get anything more modern than plastic. My granny complained that nearly everything was plastic now, even the Union Jacks on the 12th. My plastic timepiece had 4 digital numbers that clicked down to tell you the time in 24-hour style. It made the time look all space age, like in Space 1999. The digital clock radio hummed quite loudly when you plugged it in, and this kept me awake at night, but it was very good at waking me up at 6 o'clock on a Saturday morning. The radio alarm clicked on just in time for the news on Downtown Radio to tell me who had been shot last night. This was followed by Eamon Malley's farming roundup, which inexplicably gave the price of cows in Ballymena. Inevitably, I sometimes pressed the wrong button, or the provost pressed a very different button to blow up the electricity substation, and the radio alarm didn't go off at all. On these mornings, I would be wakened by the sound of a distant and dreamy diddly-ding, diddly-ding, diddly-ding. I then woke up with a start and realised I'd missed the news and the price of pigs in Portadown, and Leslie was outside our front door, impatiently pressing his button and waking up the whole street. This did not go down well with the rest of my family. My father would be furious at being wakened so early on his only day off after a long week at the foundry, and he would bang the wall between our bedrooms, shouting unsympathetically, "Will you get up, you lazy wee glipe?" Even my ever-patient mother was tested. I could hear her mutter to my father from beneath the bedclothes, "Oh my God, Eric, I don't know what we're going to do with that wee lad. He lives on Cloud Cuckoo Land, so he does." Mummy usually went to bed very late because she was always sewing a dress for a swanky lady up the Malone Road to wear to a dinner dance for the lifeboats. My big brother would be similarly upset because he needed every last minute of sleep before getting up to play rugby for the glorious First 15 rugby team at Belfast Royal Academy's playing fields in Mollusk over the mountain. He would save his anger for later in the day in the middle of the most exciting part of Doctor Who. "Are you so busy having dirty dreams about Judy Carton that you can't even wake up for your wee job as Leslie Skivvy, you big fruit?" Fortunately for him, I was a blessed peacemaker and more concerned about how the doctor was going to escape from certain death by the Daleks, so I responded with a silent sneer. The only member of my family who was not upset at me waking early on a Saturday morning was my wee brother. He had worked out that he could still go back to sleep for another few hours, but he was happy that it was Saturday morning, and very soon it would be time to get up to try to swap his Lego for Kerplunk on Noel Edmonds' multicoloured swap shop. In spite of my occasional lapses in professional punctuality, these were happy and exciting days. After all, this was the era of Saturday Night Fever and Star Wars. Most of the old cinemas in Belfast had been burnt down, but we all queued up outside the few remaining ones in the city centre to see these most amazing movies of all time. I couldn't decide whether I wanted to be Luke Skywalker or John Travolta. All the wee girls in our street fancied John Travolta because he was good at disco dancing in a white suit, but Luke Skywalker saved the universe from the terrifying Darth Vader with a lightsaber. Of course, we all knew that Darth was really just the Green Cross Code man dressed up in a black suit, but Luke was still a hero anyway because he piloted the first spaceships without visible strings. Bread men aside, it was the era of exceptionally nice teeth. The Bee Gees smiled with big white gnashers because they were number 1 every week on Top of the Pops. And Jimmy Carter smiled all the time because he was number 1 in the White House in America. I smiled a lot too, but not one of my molars was as white as a Bee Gees. In between sewing buttons, my mother laughed at Benny Hill chasing girls in their bras and fancied Des O'Connor. My father laughed when Morecambe and Wise made fun of Des and said he couldn't really sing at all. It was a time when my family was safe and happy, and everyone was still alive. apart from my other granda. But we were getting close to the years of Carlsberg Special and the tears. Denim ruled the fashion world. Everyone had denim jeans with decent flares, and most boys up our way had denim jackets. I wanted one too, but Mummy still wouldn't let me because she said Wrangler jackets were just for wee hard men who were nothing but gather-ups and scruffs from down the road, and none of them nice wee fellas at BRA wear them old jackets. Even though the most popular aftershave was also called denim. I still hadn't started shaving, but I longed for my first bottle, the same way my big brother had longed for his first bottle of Harp. Denim aftershave was a more subtle fragrance than my first aftershave Brut, and mercifully it included no misleading instructions to splash it all over. The advertisements of denim aftershave on TV showed a lovely woman's hand popping the buttons of a denim shirt on a man with a hairy chest. This commercial presented me with everything I wanted most in the world in just 30 seconds. A cool denim shirt, a hairy chest, a bottle of denim, and a lovely woman's hand. The bottle of denim seemed the most immediately achievable, so I saved up my Breadboy to buy my first bottle from Boots beside the City Hall, where Ian Paisley shouted and you got the bus. There were other distractions from my work, like the Troubles and Blondie and Space Invaders and Small Pets from Gresham Street. I was learning to become a great actor like Roger Moore in school plays, and I was beginning to travel the world with other wee deprived kids from West Belfast. I was acquiring new skills all the time, such as how to be a missionary for Jesus and how to snog properly at the Westie Disco. I had my share of worries too, like rugger boy bullies and exams at school and gunmen in the streets and bombs at the shops. Yet, in spite of these distractions, I stuck purposefully to my new career path, as stubbornly as a jam sponge falling face down on the floor of the mini shop. I soon learned the vital difference between a pan loaf and a plain loaf, and within a few weeks I was as much a fixture in the Ormo mini shop as the van was a presence in the puddled streets of the Upper Shankill. However, my first day as a bread boy was to be a memorable day for all the wrong reasons. This was because, in the very same week that my new career was born, the king died. So he did. And that's chapter 2. That's what chapter 2 is all going to be about. So let's see who's been listening. Hello to Alan says my mother was mortified when she read that bit. Sorry about that, Alan. Breeze, so happy you decided to read the book. Listened at 9 p.m. New York time. Oh, lovely to have you listening in New York. Glad you're enjoying it, Michael McKinley Senior. I know you're joining regularly. So hope you enjoyed chapter 1 of Breadboy. I'll be back same time tomorrow and we'll continue the story with chapter 2. In the meantime, stay safe wherever you are. Stay home and stay positive. Bye for now.